What's going on, everyone? Nathan coming at you with another tier list video. You guys always respond so positively to when I make these types of videos, and I'll be honest, I find them really fun and kind of relaxing to make too. I joked in my last video I made that, oh, I'll do a quick tier list video. It's gonna be no time at all. It ended up being an hour long, but it feels like it's quick, all right? It's just such a fun, like effortless sort of thought experiment to go through at the very least, and sometimes it can bring some interesting insights into the Pokemon metagame. So I'm glad we can do this here. To be honest, though, this is not a video I planned to make originally. A video I really want to make is on what the best status moves of Pokemon are. So if we judge a move like Will-O-Wisp, which has lower accuracy versus Spore, of course Spore is much better. If we weigh a move like Toxic versus Thunder Wave, which one is better of those? A lot of that comes down to, what do you value more highly? Do you value Toxic or do you value the Paralysis? Like, because they have similar accuracy. So it's an interesting question. I realized before I started making that video that I had to first have this to refer to, because again, how can I truly judge whether Will-O-Wisp is better than Toxic what if I go through this whole list and I determine that Toxic's better than Will-O-Wisp? If that's the case, then it kind of upsets my whole hierarchy. So as a result, we are going to be ranking these quickly today. Well, I say quickly, we'll see how long it ends up being. And I'll also be honest, this is my second take at this video. I recorded this in full and was editing it. I was watching the video back and I was frustrated with myself because it just came down to, I'll give a bit of a spoiler, I find these three extremely difficult to rank. And it came down to, I was just giving like my thoughts on it. And I find, especially when you do a tier list video in general, there's two ways to go. You either purely go, this is my opinion, it's subjective. If you don't like it, screw you. Like, you can go purely on that side, or you can like try to go purely like numerically and do whatever scientific approach you can and purely go on that side. But if you do what I was doing in my first take of this video, and you're kind of like, you've kind of got some facts to it, but still mostly subjective, it just feels really weak and wishy-washy. And it's just like, what's the point of this video? You're presenting it not as an opinion, but you don't have any facts to back it. I didn't like it. So I've got an idea for how to tackle these three. But first things first, let's start by ranking these first five statuses here. The first two are going to be in their D tier, which is Confuse and Attract. These I honestly barely consider to be stats effects, because if you swap out, the effect is gone. Of course, they're great if they're up and your opponent stays in. You have a 50% chance to not get any attack off, and in Confuse's case, actually damage yourself is really fantastic. There's a reason why Pokemon like Dragon Dance, Dragonite use Lumberry. It's not just in case they get burned and they want to stay strong, but it's also because if they use Outrage and they stay confused, they don't have to worry about that nasty RNG effect. So I don't think they're very good though, and compared to these ones, these are all going to be kind of removed from their status moves. So we're not going to be talking about Hurricane or Confuse Ray or Attract or Poison Powder or whatever. We're going to talk about like an empirical. Let's say you get hit by a Porygon Z Tri-Attack and you get to choose a side effect between all these moves. These would be the ones I would rank the least, because yes, they're powerful if the opponent stays in, but first of all, if you get bad RNG, it's not like Burn, which just permanently ruins their attack damage, or Paralysis, which permanently ruins their speed tier. Like, if you get unlucky, your opponent might suffer no side effects whatsoever, which sucks. But B, again, if it's an important Pokemon that I don't want to be crippled or be damaged or whatever harms from my game plan, I'm just gonna swap it out. So these are in the bottom tier for me. A tier below it, I'll put Poison. Again, you know what? It says a lot that Poison's the second or the third last one here, because I think it's actually awesome to get a Pokemon Poisoned. If I have a Poison Touch, what's it called? Muck. I think that's actually a really great ability. If I can like poison a Dragapult, or I can poison any kind of Mon, it's really useful. There's situations where, let's say I really want to Toxic my opponent's Hippowdon, because that really just prevents it from staying in for very long, and I poison it instead. I'm like, dang, I really would have preferred to have a Toxic there. There's cases where that's the case, where there's preferable forms of status, but that's pretty much the only reason you wouldn't want a Pokemon poisoned. Because if I had to name this tier, I would name it Better Than Nothing, which sounds like, shade. But it's not. It's like legitimately, it's a nice status to have. I would prefer any other status, but still very good. We'll jump to the other side of the tier list here though, and we'll do my top tiers. I think Frozen is no question the best status in Pokemon. It's completely just, a Pokemon is essentially dead if it gets fired. They have a 10, I should know this, I really should, especially if it's my second take at this video. It's a 10 or 20% chance to unthaw every turn. I don't know which. If you have Scald, and if you're lucky enough Scald, you can unthaw yourself. But for the most part, if a Pokemon's frozen, and unless they get lucky, it's pretty much dead. I will say that a bit of my, I don't know if I want to use a pet peeve, but a common problem I see with newcomers is they will get a Pokemon frozen and they'll just get stubborn or tilted or call it what you want, and they'll keep the Pokemon and keep trying to unthaw it every turn. It is really funny when you get frozen by an Ice Beam or something, and you go, no, shit, damn it, not the freeze, no. but then you get unthawed like as soon as your turn comes up, so it's like nothing happened. I find that really funny when that happens. But for the most part, you do need to treat it like it's a dead Pokemon, and it can still be useful, right? You know, if you have a Blissey that gets frozen, well, Blissey's a bad example because it has natural cure. But let's say you have a, what's another normal type Pokemon? A Beware that gets frozen. You can still keep that Beware because it's still a Shadow Ball immunity. So if your opponent has a Choice Specs Dragapult, you can continue to bring it in and essentially force your opponent to swap and like still put on defensive pressure through those means. Or, you know, Frozen Ferrothorn can still be somewhat effective with its high defensive stats, its Iron Barb's ability. It can still be totally effective, but also you should keep it as just a valuable sack opportunity. Like let's say you're in the end game and you can't find an opportunity to get in. Let's say your Dragapult is about ready to sweep, but it can't swap in any attacks or else it'll be knocked out. Well, you can sack your frozen Pokemon, let it die, and you can get a clean swap on your Dragapult. So keeping them, you know, it's frustrating to see a Pokemon get frozen and just stay in. And, you know, you can let your opponent set up the Volcarona, or you can let opponent, you know, get a free kill or free Moxie boost or whatever. There's no point to that. Just treat a frozen Pokemon like it's dead. In a similar topic, we'll be talking about my A tier, which is going to be above these three. You know, I talked about this sort of idea on my stream before, and I got some flack for ranking Sleep quite above these ones. I think it's a pretty clear delineation, honestly, because it's similar to Confuse and Attract in that, well, first of all, there's Sleep Clause, which is important. In most competitive tiers of Pokemon, only one Pokemon can be slept at a time, which I will consider in my rankings. That is significant. So if you have Spore, you know, it's not like I can Toxic 6 Pokemon on a team or any of these statuses, but I can only sleep one Pokemon at a time. So that's significant. And B, you know, there's a chance I could, if I'm playing a long game, I could sleep a Pokemon 8 times over the course of the game. And hell, if they're lucky, they could wake up turn 1 every single time. The way sleep works is that you wake up anywhere from turn 1 to turn 3 of being asleep. So if they get lucky, you can do almost nothing over the course of the game. And again, if they keep waking up, there's no long-term effects. So people would, you know, I understand why people would kind of raise an eyebrow to see sleep ranked so clearly high. And part of the reason why it's so respected is because I keep referring to Spore. It's a move that Breloom and Amoonguss have, 100% accurate, and your opponent's asleep. That's amazing. You know, you compare that to Toxic, which isn't 100% accurate, or Will-O-Wisp, which definitely isn't 100% accurate, etc. So the accuracy is a big part of why Spore is so good, but let's make no mistake. I've put a lot of shade on it just now. Sleep is very, very good. Pokemon is fundamentally a game about momentum. So clearly, I think if you're playing an offense versus offense game, I don't think anyone would question how good Sleep is in that extent, because that means that I'm getting at least 2 turns free of momentum there. And that is just a game changer. That means I can get in a better match with Pokemon. That means I can go for a breaking move. So like, I mean, let's say a Skarmory's asleep for 1 to 3 turns. If I can't break a Skarmory, but given that much time, I'm doing something very wrong. Maybe if they get a turn 1 wake up and they roost right away, maybe they can be safe, but there's almost no way if they're asleep for 2 turns, I can't break it on my team. So that means that it's just a huge wall out of the way if that's the case. But also it means that they have to burn a turn to wake up. So if I have so let's say I have a Skarmory, it gets put to sleep. I bring in, let's say, a Choice Banded Haxorus, which is I think about a 3-hit KO on a max defense Skarmory. I don't know it off the top of my head. It's just a situational thing. So let's say that happens. And I bring it in, I go for 1 close combat, it's at 47%. My opponent goes, oh crap, if I gotta swap a Skarmory, I'm just gonna die here. To swap it out to a Clefable, which can take the close combat. That means that the Skarmory has to come in and still has to find a chance to thaw, and it's gonna give me more momentum. It'll bring the Skarmory in, it'll try to wake up, and I can still go to whatever Pokemon. So, or even, you know, if it's a defensive team, that means that if I'm playing a defensive team, that means I have, you know, a number of free turns to go for Spikes, go for a Defog, at the very least, set up a more favorable matchup. So if I have a Breloom in and I sleep a Latios, that means the Breloom there's no world where Breloom's going to be doing very much at all to a Latios. So that means even if I'm using defensive team and there's no offensive pressure I can get by killing the Latios, I can go to like my Blissey and I can get up rocks and I can Seismic Toss. In SSOU, that means I can teleport away afterwards. There's all kinds of pause momentum things that Sleep gets you. So in my opinion, it's clear that it just burns turns from your opponent. If nothing else, that makes it in a tier above everything else. Might be controversial again. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think about that Sleep Clause does, you know, if you want to argue that the presence of Sleep Clause puts it in the same range as these 3 right here, that's completely fine in my opinion. Because that is, you know, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, it's kind of, you know, having 6 Toxic Mon is really good. But by the same token, how many times has that really happened? You know, that's the other delineation I would make sure to mark, is that while theoretically you can paralyze a whole squad of teams like ABR in a competitive game, it doesn't happen very often. Whereas you can get the maximum effectiveness out of Sleep very quickly if you have a Spore or whatever. So I think Sleep is just gonna get you free turns. I don't want to go into it anymore. Let's get to the meat and potatoes here. Toxic, Burn, and Paralysis. I've wasted so much time on this exact topic of questioning which of these is the best, because it's so situational, right? So I think, what I always talk about with burn is that if you burn the Pokemon you want to burn, like let's say it's a choice banded Haxorus once again, right? That Haxorus' main job as a wall breaker is now useless. It's bringing essentially nothing to the table anymore. It was never a defensive threat. It didn't care if it was toxic in the first place, but if it's burnt, it's doing nothing for me anymore. It's a dead slot on the team. The only way it's killing something if it's just a pathetically weak Pokemon like a Whimsicott, and I have Poison Jab on this Haxorus. Like for the most part, it's essentially useless to me. But by the same token, if I burn a special attacker like a Latios, or even worse, like a defensive special attacker like a Tentacruel, a Jellicent, then it's really useless. But there's also different things where, like, some tiers have more physical attackers than others. Like SSOU has a great deal of physical attackers. Or in Gen 5 overused, burns do 12% damage per turn, which means if you're talking about the example of a Rotom Wash in that tier, if you burn a Rotom Wash, that's extremely significant in that tier, because that means that if they swap in, they're taking Stealth Rock's damage, 12%, Will-O-Wisp another 12%, likely Sandstorm damage, another 6%, we're at 30% already. If the Rotom Wash is swapping in on attack, even a resisted one like in another Hydro Pump, that means that the Rotom Wash who's coming in a resisted Hydro Pump is now at 50% damage. That's a lot of word garbage there. Probably talk too fast there, but you get the idea of just, in that specific context, it's fantastic. But, it's the same thing with Paralysis or Toxic. If I'm up against a team who's got a Toxapex and 2 Steel Pokemon, most of their team's immune to Toxic. By the same token, I'm playing against a team that's got, a Beware and a Tangrowth and a Tornadus. It's a very defensive team by those 3, it sounds like. Then that's unbelievable. Just completely suffocating their ability to sustain a long game against me. Or Paralysis, which works really well against not just offense. So if we're talking about hyper offense, it's great to paralyze a Latios or a Dragonite or a Dragapult. I'm only listing dragons right now. But like even a Rillaboom, even a Mamoswine if it's Glare or whatever. Paralysis is great against offense, and it's also great against defense. And the effect that, like, if I paralyze a Clefable, and I get lucky, let's say I've got a Mamoswine whose Ice Cold Crash is doing about 39% versus Clefable. So normally Clefable should be able to recover that damage off and not really lose that matchup 1v1 versus the Mamoswine. If the Clefable's paralyzed, it's not taking any damage, doesn't care about its speed tier dropping, that doesn't matter, but there's a 30% chance of getting paralyzed. In addition, Ice Cold Crash has a high chance to flinch too, so that's kind of adding on to that effect. So if I get 1 flinch or 1 for full paralysis, all of a sudden that matchup that I wasn't winning versus the Clefable, I can get the kill on it. So that's really significant too. So its Paralysis is kind of unique in that it's the most versatile in a sense, in that it's good versus offense and defense. But then by the same token, functionally, most ground types aren't getting paralyzed. They can be paralyzed by Glare, but that's pretty rare. For the most part, they're immune to electric moves, like Thunder Wave, like whatever. So they're not really getting paralyzed. And of course, electric types are immune to it too. And again, it's a kind of a luck thing where, sure, I could paralyze a whole team, but if your opponent doesn't get full paralyzed often, then it doesn't really crop up. Anyways, I've already talked about it for a couple minutes. You can see why I keep going in circles about it. It's all circumstantial. It all depends what tier, what context your team is, your opponent's tier is, etc., etc. And even then, I was trying to reason this in my previous take of this video, and I couldn't come to an answer that just didn't feel weak and wishy-washy to me. So I did what I normally do in these situations, and I did something kind of extra. And I was going to just prepare this beforehand for the video, but I'm going to rank how effective in a specific tier, again, because you can't do this holistically over all the Pokemon. But I'm going to talk about, let's say, for the example of just pure SSOU, how good is Toxic versus Burn versus Paralysis. So I'm going to quickly run through and grade each of it. So Barraskewda, for example, does not like to be Toxic. It's a good effect versus it. But it's not devastating because it's kind of in and out pretty quickly for the most part. It's not Life Orb like a Crawdaunt, so it's not the residual damage isn't too devastating. But a Burn, on the other hand, is completely devastating because, and same as a Paralysis, because Barraskewda is a Pokemon that wins with its physical attacking and wins with its speed. So it's completely fantastic in that extent. So I'm going to run through all of these here. If you don't want to watch me go through this quickly, I was going to do this before I edited the video, but I'm going to keep it in just for the effort of transparency. Because this is going to be subjective rankings too, right? I say this is a less subjective way of ranking them, but it fundamentally is in a sense, because if you think about it, like, is Clefable being paralyzed a good effect or a strong effect or a weak effect if I don't get full parried, because good players don't get paralyzed? That's fully subjective too, right? So, So this is subjective, but if you want to see it for full transparency's sake, you can watch it. I'll put the timestamp, or I'll probably edit it so that you can skip ahead if you want to. But for now, yeah, let's run through it really quickly. I'm hoping this won't take an extremely long amount of time. It's not gonna be a perfect system, but just as a way of communicating how these are. That way I'll have some sort of basis to rank these, at least in the case of SSOU. So let's go through it quickly here. Here's my scale right here before I zoom in. Okay, so we got Bisharp, who is immune to Toxic, can't happen. Paralysis, Bisharp doesn't really win with speed, especially with its Sucker Punch, but I think it's very hard to argue that a Paralysis is anything other than good. Bisharp especially, because you do want to be able to outspeed something like a Fable, but it's very hard to argue that like a 30% chance of just not being able to get the move off that you want to is anything less than at least good, in my opinion. Maybe in the case of like a Blissey, it gets different because Blissey can swap out a Natural Cure, so then maybe it would be a C instead and have a weak effect. But I think it's, again, you can argue with me, again, it's a subjective thing at the end of the day, but I think it's at least good. But a burn, again, Bisharp wins through physically breaking its opponent. If that's halved, that's devastating to it. Blacephalon, though, C doesn't really, actually, it can't be burned, so that's an F. Toxic, it is pretty fragile with its Stealth Rock, so I'll put it as a B. It's not trying to stay in for too long unless it's a Calm Mindset. That's the other thing, is like, if it's a Calm Mindset, it's probably an A. If it's a Choice Spec set, it's kind of a hit and run set, it's more of a B. So again, I don't know, I'm not gonna sweat it too much. It does primarily win through speed though, so A, I'll put that there. Blissey, again, I think most defensive walls are going to be ranking as a B in Paralysis, like this Clefable here. Blissey, I'll drop it a tier because its Natural Cure means it's swapping out and it's losing Paralysis there anyways. C, it's like Burn's pretty much useless, not affecting anything. And Toxic, I'll also do C because that way if a Blissey's trying to stay in for a long time versus you repeatedly like stall you out, it can't technically lose if it's being toxic. Yeah, it's wishy-washy, I acknowledge. Buzzwole definitely does not like being toxic, so I put that as a B, maybe an A. Burn, same thing. It's not really, it's more of a physical wall than it is an attacker, like wall breaker most of the time, so I'm okay with that. Same with Paralysis, that's just a B across the board in my opinion. Clefable literally does not care if it's burnt or toxic. Corviknight can't be toxic. It doesn't hate Paralysis, but doesn't love it for sure. Burns is tricky because some Pokemon that like just make some messy matchups all of a sudden. C or B, it's definitely one of those two. Dragapult definitely doesn't really care if it's burns too much. Toxic, it cares, but it's more of a hit and runner. Super cares about Paralysis. It wins through speed pretty primarily. Dragonite, I'll do A, only because sometimes they're choice banded. This is SSOU though, so they're actually much less rarely choice banded. But A, because you can technically overcome your speed tier through boosting repeatedly with Dragon Dance. Maybe it should be S, but that's fine with me. But almost always wins through physical attacking, so Burn, that's essential for me. And Toxic also I'll probably put as an A because it can't sweep very effectively if it's toxic. That means it ruins its effectiveness long term. F here, I'll do B for Burn because there's some matchups that Ferrothorn is just useless in if it's burnt all of a sudden. Paralysis, again, I think it's almost always going to be a B. Same for Garchomp. Actually, Garchomp does win with speed, so I'll make that an A. Again, it's kind of weird because it's glared, so like it has to be glared to be paralyzed, but I guess there's the case where you could Dragon Claw Zapdos and get static, so whatever. Does almost always win with offense though, but maybe I'll make that an A because sometimes they just want to stay in and be a defensive presence. Burning is difficult to judge too, like how purely effective it is. I'm not going to justify every single thing I think here because this is just going to take a little bit too long. I want this to just be a quick illustration of my point here. But yeah, Heatran literally can't be hit with these. It doesn't want to be paralyzed. Same with Hippo. Hippo will do B as well. Toxic, A for sure. Super limits its effectiveness. Kartana can't be toxic. And Burn, it's useless if it's burned, and it's much worse if it's paralyzed. Landorus definitely doesn't like being toxic, it'll do that, but it's really bad with a burn, and if it was paralyzed, it'd be pretty bad, but doesn't need the speed per se. You cannot be either of these, and burns mean almost nothing to you. Melmetal's really bad with the burn, it can't be toxic. Paralysis really does not matter, but again, it's hard to say worse than B, because there's situations where you'll be able to get a KO, but you get full paralyzed, you don't get a KO in that case. Mew, okay, synchronized, I'm not gonna think about that, that's a weird thing to think about. It's almost never running offensive sets, so I'll do a C there. In terms of toxic, especially if it's a defensive set, that's pretty bad, so I'll say A there. Then paralysis, it does often take advantage of its speed tier, so maybe, let's say A, why not? Kind of iffy. Alolan Ninetales definitely cares about its speed tier for sure there. It's also pretty fragile, so a toxic really adds up on it quickly. Burns does not care about. Pelipper, same thing. Paralysis doesn't really matter so much. Being toxic does definitely wear down on it, especially when Stealth Rock weak. Very similar to the Alolan Ninetales there, though. And it's bulkier and we'll be using Roost, which are just going to accumulate with the toxic there, so that super matters. Regieleki is pretty fragile. and it's not in for long, but let's say B at least. Burns does not care about. Paralysis, it cannot be paralyzed. Rillaboom's tricky because it does value its base 85 speed tier, but it's also taking advantage of Grassy Glide so much. Let's go back to B on that one. It's useless when it's burnt though. And Toxic, not so important actually. I'm tempted to do C, but I'll do a B at least because it also just negates the effect of the grassy terrain heal on it. Slowbro hates being burned. Sorry, Toxic, that sucks. Does not mind being burned, however. We'll do that for that too. It's pretty much gonna be B across the board here. Tapu Fini is a weird one to rank because it is technically immune to them, but let's pretend that the terrain's down for whatever reason. And Toxic, it would definitely hate. Paralysis, this is just a lot of Bs. I'm kind of spoiling something here, but I also ranked the BDSP tier, OU, and there was much less Bs for Paralysis in that tier, so I'm kind of interested to see. I thought, it seems like, why did they even include B if it's always going to be, why did they even include Paralysis if it's always going to be a B? But I don't know, it's kind of in SSOU, it's mattering way more than it did in BDSP, so that's an interesting thing to note so far. There's also a lot more Pokemon in OU in this tier. Anyways, back to Slowking Galar, also essentially useless if it's burnt. Tempted to make an F, but I'll do this for now. Actually, Fini should be a C as well. In terms of Toxic, it can't be. Coco, can't be hit with that, doesn't care about burns. And in terms of Toxic, that definitely matters. Let's say B. Lele, same thing. Pretty much the exact same thing, but definitely does not like being paralyzed. It wins with speed pretty frequently. Tornadus Therian, I'm tempted to do an S. I'll do an A because it can still do its job when it's paralyzed, just much less effective. It definitely hates getting Toxic. It ruins its survivability there. Burns don't really matter for it. Burns definitely don't matter for Toxapex. I could do an F. No, because it does give 6% chip per turn. I mean, again, this might be one of the bigger points of contention here is if a Pokemon like Toxapex is the burn, a C or an F. I'm going to say it's a C because 6% is just negating its item. Like Toxapex runs Black Sludge for a reason, and that's essentially ruined when it's got the Will-O-Wisp, right? And if you knock it off, that's a reverse effect. So that's like all of a sudden, if it comes on Stealth Rocks, it's losing a functional 18% between the damage from burn and the Stealth Rocks damage. So all of a sudden, there's lots of Pokemon that can 2-hit KO a 80% Toxapex, but couldn't 2-hit KO a 100% Toxapex. So, it's definitely like the least valuable case of a burn. But if I have a choice between, like, Toxapex literally cannot be toxic, and Paralysis I don't care about so much. If I have to choose, I would prefer to have it Will-O-Wisp than not, obviously. So I'll put C. It's next to useless, but not quite useless. Can't be toxic though. Paralysis, sure, it's useful. T-Tar is interesting because it does win with speed a little bit more than something like a Toxapex, for example. But also, like, it just, in the case of a Choice Band Wall Breaker, it's just coming in strong matchups regardless. It almost doesn't matter so much. I think I'll do B. I don't know. Again, I can't overanalyze all 40 of these Pokemon here. It is quite bad when it's burnt, but I won't go up to S like I do with most physical attackers because it can still Thunder Wave, it can still burn, all that stuff. It's almost more akin to a Corviknight in that sense, but it does often win with offense too, so it's hard to say. Toxic definitely matters though. Let's go B again, or Shifu Rapid Strike. Let's go B, S, and then for Paralysis, it's hard to judge between. I'm going to say an A. It cares about speed tier a lot. Same for Victini. Can't be burnt though. Toxic definitely matters, especially if it's Choice Band. Do I want to go up to an A? Not really. It's kind of a hit and run Choice Band. It B creates and swaps out. Volcarona, say an S. It can't really be a Quiver Dance sweeper if it's toxic. You're limited to maybe one kill after a Quiver Dance. Your opponent has to be completely unprepared against Volcarona. Like if you got a Volcarona counter and the Volcarona's toxic, it's essentially useless. So if I've got a T-Tar, I can just bring it on every single time on the Volcarona and lose almost nothing. So that super matters to me. And same with this, I'll go A because it can theoretically Quiver Dance past its drop in speed from Quiver Dance from the Paralysis. It does primarily win with speed, so it's at least an A there. Weavile, it super wins with speed. It's gonna be my first S on Paralysis here because it just super cares about its speed tier. It doesn't get a chance to boost. It's just not nearly as effective when it's slow. Same goes for its offensive power. In terms of Toxic, it is a fragile Pokemon that doesn't want to be taking damage very much, even if it does have heavy duty boots. But I'll keep it at B there. Zapdos sucks if it gets toxic. It really relies on being in frequently and not getting chipped down. Then it can't be paralyzed. Zapdos Galar can get paralyzed, and it does win with speed, especially if it's Scarf like Last time I checked the usage stats, I think it was still primarily Scarfed, so that would definitely take it down a notch there. It is also useless without a burn if it's burnt, or nearly useless. Maybe that's, you know, the word useless might also be controversial here because it can still beat fighting types if it's Scarfed Brave Bird, right? But its primary role is just extremely diminished. And then Toxic, it is a fragile Pokemon that gets worn down really quickly between Brave Bird and Stealth Rocks too. So A and B is close here. I'll do B because it's not as bad as Zapdos getting hit by that. Zeraora, pretty much the same thing-ish. Super hates getting burnt and can't get paralyzed. Okay, so that's this list essentially done. I'm going to take a beat and I'm going to plug all of these numbers into a grade point calculator and determine what the grades would average out to be. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so I crunched the numbers and it came out to be really interesting. Let's use that word. They grade out very similarly here. So this averages out to be an equal of B by my criteria. And these are somewhere in the C+ range. You know, not perfect numerical system. You get the idea. So paralysis, unsurprisingly, because it's always at least good. There's not a single situation where it's not at least okay. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but an interesting attitude from ABR, who's perhaps one of the most decorated Smogon competitive players of all time, is that he always throws paralysis onto his team, especially on metagames where it's kind of longer lasting, because it just stacks RNG in your favor over the course of a game, right? If you're playing multiple, like, you know, he plays a ton of games, he played lots and lots of games, especially like a long 100 turn game, it just stacks RNG in your favor over and over and over again, right? So that's kind of what was reflected here, where I think I maybe had 1 or 2 S's in terms of speed for paralysis. Like it is almost never an S like it is with burns, where it's just super, super effective. But by the same token, there's very few chances, unless they're literally immune to it, where it's not good. At the very worst, you can hit a Clefable with it and still, you know, prevent Stealth Rocks going at 1 turn, win a speed tie with another Clefable, or prevent it from healing, be able to get a 2-hit KO that you shouldn't be able to get otherwise. So it's always at least good. Burns is a lot more volatile, obviously, but the heights of a burn, and again, maybe you could argue that I'm overrating these things here, and a Barraskewda should be an A instead of an S, whatever, but it is subjective. But by my criteria, it's more volatile, and the heights of S bring it up to be a little bit better than Toxic. I think probably the thing with Toxic is Toxic's also almost always a B. There's just a lot of immunities. There's a reason why Poison, well, Toxapex sees a lot of exposure, obviously, but not just Toxapex, but all the steel types are immune to it too. So it actually has a fairly high amount of Fs too, certainly compared to paralysis. And also my sample size kind of is inflated because, you know, I'd actually be very curious. I'm going to do this right now. If I changed all the ground types to be Fs, how would that affect the rankings for paralysis? I'm going to do that right now. Just give me a second. Now that is interesting. It brings it down to the exact same number as what I had burn at. That's really interesting. And there's only 3 ground types in the tier right now. It's Garchomp, Landorus, and Hippowdon. That's really fascinating. Because here I was thinking, so let me reveal this. I also did an advance. You guys saw me go through the SSOU, but I also did the BDSP one in advance of myself too. And the results are very similar. The results are very, very similar, where there's a clear delineation between these 3 and very similar numbers, which is interesting because there's very different Pokemon in both tiers. But now, again, you know, it is a bit of a cheat in SSOU because Glare does kind of exist, but it's so not existent in the tier. So let me do the same thing in BDSP and remove the grade of ground types. So give me 1 more sec. Okay, I'm finally done crunching the numbers here. It actually dips to be just below. If I get really cruel with it and I also make Breloom an F instead, because Breloom I kind of as a C, because most of the time it's going to be Toxic Heal, most of the time it's going to be immune to it. And even its regular offensive sets doesn't care, but if I make this an F, Garchomp an F, and Gliscor an F, etc., because I don't even know if there is actually a Glare in SSOU, but you could technically U-turn on a static Pokemon. Anyways, I'm getting way too in the sticks for this point here, but it drops below burn. So it's very comparable. Doesn't matter. This is probably a belabored point by this point. I'll probably cut to here in the video, but the idea is generally that these are very, very close, and Toxic's a clear last. It's still really good, but the main thing is just the presence of poison and steel types makes it less useful. And even when you do hit it, it's not demonstrably better than a burn or paralysis, which have very dramatic effects, especially on offensive Pokemon too. So that's where we stand. You know, Toxic is best against Pokemon that are defensive. Like it can still be very effective. Like the heights of a Toxic Pokemon are similar to the heights of a burn Pokemon, like a Zapdos or a Hippowdon or a Tangrowth or whatever. It's extremely, extremely good. But the problem is a lot of these defensive presences that you would like to get toxic can't be. So for example, if you could toxic a Corviknight or Skarmory, that'd be insane, but you can't. Same with Toxapex, same with the Ferrothorn, etc. So anyways, that's gonna be my list as a result here. I feel pretty good about this as it stands right now. I'm actually gonna keep Para a little bit above Burn, I think, just with my gut feeling. I've kind of changed my tune here. I think Paralysis, despite these little adjustments we made at the very end, I think I am going to keep it just a hair above Burn because they're essentially tied. At best, they're tied, and then you just go with your gut feeling. And I think I'll take the Paralysis here, especially because I think I prefer a Thunder Wave to the inaccurate Will-O-Wisp anyways. That's me done. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was an interesting thought experiment. I'm glad that I went through this process more so than I did in the previous attempts at this video. It feels a lot more intellectually honest to me, I guess is the word I would put it towards it, where I just feel like my process is very straightforward and just less, you know, with a gut feeling. It is fundamentally gut feeling, but it's a more well-founded opinion is how I would describe it. So yeah, I'm happy about it. I hope you guys enjoyed too. And now that I've got this done, when I'm ranking the best status attacks and moves or whatever in Pokemon, I can do it from this basis. Where, for example, the fact that Sports 100% accurate is awesome because, in my opinion, Sleep is still the best non-freeze status effect in Pokemon. But now if I'm weighting Thunder Wave versus Will-O-Wisp, I can refer to this as a general idea that I do prefer Paralysis to Burns. However, again, this is subjective. I'm curious to see what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. These three in the B tier are so extremely close. I'm sure everyone's got their own opinions on it. Make sure to chime in below. I'll make sure to read them all. Until next time, though, take it easy.